Good morning, good afternoon, good day from wherever you are connected. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this webinar about the future of healthcare and long-term investment. It's a pleasure to host you here as a co-organizer from IE University, the Center of Governance of Change, and the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. I am Susana Malcorra. I am the Dean of the School of Global and Public Affairs at IE University. It is clear that the pandemic has put in value, at the forefront of value, the notion of healthcare. So it is absolutely pertinent that we gather today to discuss its future and the long-term investment associated to it. It is without any doubt that COVID-19 has made all of us react to its influence. But it's also true that the sovereign wealth funds have reacted very rapidly with a clear message on investment. The SWFs have doubled their investments in biotechnology compared to the average investments in biotech in the prior 3 years. This is during 2020. In line with the industry, 2020 marked a record year of healthcare innovation investments with a special attention on remote and continuous monitoring, twice compared to 2019, and particularly in telemedicine, 3 times compared to 2019. There is a revolution in this moment associated to healthcare, and technology has a huge impact in this revolution. The sovereign wealth funds, as long-term investors and government-owned institutions, can play a key role in transforming national healthcare systems and providing funding for disease remedies, particularly for diseases that could provoke yet another pandemic like the one we are still living through these days. The registered sovereign wealth funds today represent 1.5 trillion in assets under management, which means that the conversation that is going to take place within this webinar is absolutely essential to look into what are the perspectives to maximize the investment and the return on investment, not only in financial terms, but in healthcare terms, which is the main differentiator towards a healthy and sustainable society, which I think is the main goal that we all have. So without delay, let me now pass the floor to Duncan Bonfield, CEO of the International Forum of SWFs. Duncan has been a partner with us in this journey. In fact, this is the 3rd time that we come together this year to discuss different matters, and it shows the dedication and the attention that the sovereign wealth funds are giving to key subjects. And today, again, is one that, through the lens of the pandemic, worries all of us and requires the attention of all of us. So Duncan, without any further delay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susanna, and thank you to IE University and all involved for your help and support on this. So welcome to our first panel, which is Institutional Investors and the Future of Healthcare, Recent Experiences and Challenges Ahead. Our first panelist is Georgina Murphy, Senior Investment Manager at the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund. Georgina is the lead at ICIF for life science and healthcare investment. Welcome, Georgina. Our second panelist is Chris McFadden. He's a managing director at KKR. And we're especially grateful to Chris as he's on the west coast of America and has joined us very early in his morning. So welcome to you both. Georgina, let me start with you. If I could just ask you to summarize ICIF's approach to investment and specifically to what you look for in healthcare. And then I'll ask the same question to Chris, and then we're going to have a poll question for you, the audience. So, Georgina, if you could summarize ISIF's approach.
Thanks, Duncan, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. So ISWF's approach to life sciences, I guess, is a two-pronged approach. We invest in venture capital firms as an LP, and we also take direct equity positions in companies. On the venture capital side, we have, I would say, cultivated a portfolio of top-tier investment teams, both local and international. And we see, I would say, really outsized returns from this investment strategy, both in terms of commercial return and systemic impact in Ireland. These firms invest a multiple of ISIF's commitment into Irish, and they also leverage significant multiples of that in international financing. And so they bring in teams, world-class teams with expertise, technical, sectoral, networks, access to international markets, sometimes or oftentimes teams that wouldn't necessarily look at Irish opportunities if it weren't for the connection with these funds. On the direct side, we do take direct equity positions where there is a strong economic incentive to do so. Here, we're looking for technologies, teams, syndicates that have the right mix, capability, and ambition to build sustainable businesses. And the ISIF has the capacity to provide patient capital to enable companies to grow and ideally become national champions and internationally recognized life science companies with origins or significant operations here in Ireland.
Chris, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So KKR, as many of you may know, is a global alternatives investment firm. We have somewhere in the range of $250 billion plus of assets under management, and really now invest across a variety of investment strategies: traditional private equity, growth equity. We have a substantial credit business as well as an infrastructure fund. But there are certainly some common themes as it applies to our healthcare investing that I would highlight for this group. Certainly, first and foremost, we see the value of enabling digital transformation. It has a profound effect, not just on operating performance, but downstream on patients and providers. Secondly, we recognize the urgent need to continue to increase clinical productivity. It's one of the key elements in our estimation of improving access and affordability. Third, it's really critical and a corner piece to our investment strategy that we identify organizations that have clear and well-articulated, well-supported health economic value propositions. It is essentially central to how we think about our investment strategy. Fourth, has to be a really strong marquee compliance culture. That's important to KKR as a firm, but as a practical matter, being and living in a compliant culture is critical to sustain success in healthcare investing in our experience. And then finally, we're looking for teams and organizations where we as a partner can make an important contribution to that company's continued success. And so where we find those elements, we are enthusiastic about deploying capital, and that applies to the US. It applies, of course, to our Asia franchise as well as Europe.
It's interesting. It's quite interesting, the contrast that I think we may well pick up on in a second. But let's now move over to our poll question for you, the audience. And that question is, and I think it's going to appear on screen, there it is. What is the main barrier for sovereign wealth funds and institutional investors to invest in healthcare? And we've given you three options as to your potential answers here. One is lack of expertise to conduct technical due diligence. The second is the complexity of business models. And the third is the challenges and uncertainties of the regulatory environment. And if I can ask you to tick one of those boxes and then we'll get a pretty instant result coming up for that. So whilst we just wait for that answer, I think our second panel is going to cover regulation. So I'm not going to ask our panelists about regulation, but I am going to ask them to pick up on the top two answers: due diligence and complexity. But first, we're going to have a little look at to see how the audience has responded, which I'm hoping we're going to see any second now by the wonders of modern science. Is that coming up? We'll give them a few more seconds for those answers to appear. And I have something. If you just hold on, I will look at that. Here we go. So, looking at my screen. So, there it is on the screen. So, lack of expertise gets 23%, complexity 23%, and is there challenges and uncertainties of regulation over 50%. That's quite interesting, isn't it? That what people see as that. As I say, I think the second panel is going to deal in some depth with regulation. So let's not cover that. Let's look at the other two issues. So firstly, and Georgina, let me move. Well, in fact, no, Chris, let me move to you, because you mentioned already about the clear economic value proposition, so which really is around business model. So can you just unpack that a little bit, because it is a complex area, especially if it's in biotech, pharma, those kind of things, long-term horizons. So just tell us a little bit about your thinking in that particular point.
Yeah, listen, I think this is an important question for an investor, whether you sit in a GP seat or LP seat or a co-investor. You know, the complexity, the uniqueness of healthcare in many regards is one of the things that I think makes it an interesting area. It can be intimidating or difficult to enter into, but yet, you know, I think part of our view is that same complexity is a source of alpha as it differentiates the assessment, and therefore hopefully the investment returns over time. And certainly, you know, firms large and small are, you know, utilizing both internal expertise and third-party expertise, which is increasingly available and accessible to help make sort of those key determinations. The health economic dynamics, I think, have, you know, become more important over time, not just in life sciences, where you're trying to think about cost versus alternatives. What is the benefit to life and expansion? How do you think about surgical versus therapeutic treatments, for example, but also in health services. And health services is perhaps the less mature view of health economic equations, but particularly in a US context where so-called value-based care and a number of payment model reforms are really beginning to shape how we think about commercial strategy. Our insight is that if you're not entirely anchored in how you are contributing positively to outcomes, how you're contributing to cost, then you're going to have a business model that is at real risk of stalling over time, particularly as those payment reform changes continue to ripple through the healthcare economy. You know, Europe in many ways is more advanced here, given the payment structure differences in that market. But in both cases, we think it's a cornerstone piece of understanding, you know, whether a business has real economic value creation potential over time.
That's interesting, isn't it? And maybe that's, as you say, a fairly new phenomenon, especially in the relatively new in the US market. So, but Georgina, moving over to you, I mean, looking at due diligence, when you're making direct equity investments, for example, right, how do you go about that? Because, you know, especially as we've heard from Chris, pretty complex investments quite often.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, I think that I would possibly buck the trend on the poll in saying that although it is accessible and it is available both, you know, internally and certainly through external resourcing, you know, the right expertise is absolutely key in these investment decisions, and probably the biggest challenge, because if you get the expertise right, you can make, you know, the best assessment of the risks around the business model, which include, I suppose, the regulatory environment. But as Chris noted, the regulatory environment is sort of dwarfed in a lot of ways by the payer complexities in different jurisdictions and other aspects of the investment. So I think we, from our perspective, getting the right sort of expertise from the start in terms of understanding the investment opportunity, but through to post-investment monitoring, representation, and we would use a combination of kind of internal expertise and external, both external services, but also we work very closely a lot of the time with our venture capital funds, and many of the opportunities that come to us as direct investment opportunities may be already backed by by GPs who we have a long history of co-investment with. So we work with them very much to sort of work through the diligence process.
So that's interesting. That picks up on Chris's point about complexity being a source of alpha, doesn't it? So that you can see that and increasing specialities and expertise from partners. Now, the next panel is going to look at risk in some detail. So I want to move now to time horizons. So healthcare, especially on the pharma and the biotech side, can be a very long-term investment. And we know that Georgina is a sovereign wealth fund is patient capital and can have a long-term horizon, and it's got not just economic return, but other challenges and other mandates to fulfill. But Chris, how do you approach this, especially when you've got multiple LP partners?
Yeah, I think each investment is obviously different in the sense that you enter an investment, to Georgina's point, with a view of what is your investment thesis, what contributions, non-capital contributions do you think you're making to that business? How are you leveraging, what capabilities, market access, intellectual property the company already has? And then, where's your value inflection point? And it's so important, as everyone on this call knows, to have a wide-eyed view of, what that a value inflection point is going to look like, how long you think it's going to take, what are the resources to get there, and what are the risk mitigants if the timeline slips. One of the fortunate capabilities that I think we have as a firm, as do other large firms, is we have many different pools of capital, and certainly we have both the traditional private equity fund, which has a conventional 3 to 5 year sort of time horizon. But we also have what we call a core private equity fund, which really focuses on 5, 8, sometimes 10-year time horizons, particularly for those business and segments that have really compelling, through the business cycle, sort of compounding growth characteristics. And healthcare often fits naturally in to that investment strategy. And so, obviously at the investment committee level for our firm and amongst our leaders, we want to try to fit the team's view of the asset, the market opportunity that we're targeting, that value creation plan that is obviously so integral to our investment process, and then where does it fit with the pool of capital that is best going to allow us and our investors to get the most from the opportunity. No one's perfect 100% of the time. It goes without saying, but we certainly think good preparation makes for better outcomes.
Right, and Georgina, you've got the if Chris has multiple LP partners, you have one very big partner in the Irish government. What challenges does that bring you? I mean, and I especially know that you've got multiple mandates, so it isn't just economic return. Can you just tell us a little bit about those challenges?
Sure. So, yeah, as you noted, we report into the Department of Finance. We're a government fund. Today, the ISIP is about an 8.6 billion fund with a statutory mandate to invest for commercial return and to stimulate economic growth and employment in Ireland. So I guess one of the challenges that we have faced since the fund's inception is being able to reasonably flexibly, shift our investment focus, our investment priorities to align with kind of pertinent issues for the Irish government and for the Irish society. over the years. Over the last few years, we've invested to support the regions outside of Dublin, Indigenous business, to support companies through Brexit, and we've made investments to tackle the climate crisis. Just last year, we had to somewhat kind of react rapidly to the pandemic, and we launched the Pandemic Stabilisation and Recovery Fund as part of the ISIF. This was a €2 billion fund to provide kind of urgent capital to companies in Ireland who were, suffering kind of near-term liquidity challenges as a result of the pandemic. And over the year, I guess our investment activity has broadened from this sort of narrow remit, looking at companies looking for urgent financing, which was largely through the provision of debt, to investing under the recovery arm of that stabilisation and recovery, and looking at how we can deploy capital to catalyse markets and stimulate growth of the Irish economy going forward. And those investments have been, again, realigning with those priority themes, very much looking at how we can put money into the venture capital firms and the various platforms that will support Indigenous and venture-backed businesses, and how we can support life science companies in Ireland. The Irish life science sector is significant and has been a significant factor in Ireland's recovery since the pandemic. So it's important that we maintain an investment focus on this sector, and particularly maintain a vibrant venture capital market as kind of a key source of talent and innovation for the larger strategics that are in Ireland, maintaining that talent pool and mix of technical expertise to ensure that larger strategics continue to come to Ireland for R&D expertise.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that you have to, nurture, if you like, the whole sector, investment sector, as well, as a way to get you to get that kind of growth. Okay, well, I'm going to look just in the last few minutes a little bit about sector focus, if I can, and I'll start with you again, Georgina. But what specific healthcare sectors do you look at, and what drives your decisions?
Well, we look, I would say, as a first statement, we would look at most sectors. We look to align, obviously, our investment with the talent pool that is here in Ireland. We have a strong history in, biological manufacturing, and we have a fantastic foundation going forward to develop a strong presence in advanced cell therapeutic manufacturing, and leveraging off that talent base and existing foothold that industries have here. That's kind of on the bio side. We have a very established medtech sector in Ireland. We have over 300 larger medtech companies based here, and a strong history of medtech R&D. When we look at, the kind of emerging fields, we also have a lot of talent around ICT, and for that reason, areas like connected technologies, connected health is certainly an area of interest to us. Both the cell and gene therapy area, I would say, and connected health, although very different, are two kind of niche sectors that have been very much buoyed by the pandemic. And we've seen this across our portfolio companies and the companies that we have direct positions in. On the cell and gene therapy side, you can see the pace at which vaccines were brought to clinic, really underscoring the value for governments and private investors to invest in basic research and understanding complex diseases and complex solutions to those diseases. The way the regulators have worked kind of holistically with industry, and looking not just at the therapeutic, but the manufacturing challenges and clinical challenges to bring products to patients quickly, is something that's the cell and gene technologies will certainly leverage going forward. And the investment and kind of knowledge gained in large scale cold chain supply logistics, is another area that I think cell and gene therapy will hugely leverage off, and we're keen to sort of where we can attract further activity in that space in Ireland, both through direct investment and through our funds. As I said, we've seen the uplift in any company that's bringing solutions to remote care, looking after the well and the chronically ill outside of the acute care setting. And again, given our kind of core talent base in Ireland in ICT, digital technology and medtech, that's certainly an area that we're very attracted to as a strategic investor.
And Chris, Georgina is restricted mostly to Ireland. You have the whole world. You mentioned America, you mentioned Europe and Asia. So how do you decide on a sector approach, or do you take that approach, or is it on those themes that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think it's really the themes we talked about earlier. Obviously, each regional team has its own priority setting, and we do not have a traditional venture capital orientation or pool of capital. So we think principally through the lens of commercial stage businesses, growth, and into buyout. Obviously, with the potential to reach for really large platform like businesses when those opportunities present themselves. But I want to pick up on something Susanna talked about. I think Georgina just mentioned on it as well, which is what does this larger topic of virtual care, or sometimes thought of as telehealth, what are the post-COVID implications of that? Because I think we've all experienced in the last year and a half some exposure to how we can rethink our relationship between ourselves, our caregivers, physicians, and the support ecosystem that lives around them in a way that is really positive for access. It's positive for care delivery. It improves outcomes. And so, while we have thought about telehealth historically as a bit of a point-to-point modality, thinking about how telehealth is an extension of other provider organizations and really much more integrated into how we think about both urgent and chronic care, we think is a powerful and a really durable investment opportunity, and one that we're continuing to invest energy in.
So, and that comes back, I think, does it, to your earlier point about digital transformation. It's part of that story. So presumably on any investment, or not any, but a number of investments, you're looking for that element in an investment as well, as an indicator of, a prospective indicator.
Well, there's no question that, across all of our industry groups, the power of digital transformation is important. It creates operating scale. It increases, the reach of the businesses that we're invested in. I think in healthcare, that has at least two expressions that are important, right? There's how we're using data, capturing data, organizing data, and then using the insights from that data to improve how we deliver a service or think about a product in a number of fashions. In addition to that, there is how we're using modalities like we're doing here today, and using so-called synchronous engagement between provider and patient to really reframe, right, how we think about care, who gives it, when it's received, who's a participant of it, different than what we've long experienced as going to a private practice or a clinic and meeting with a physician one-on-one. When we take the physicality away from that patient-physician experience without losing the patient-physician intimacy, you've really opened up, again, a whole different set of how to imagine care in ways that are good to those core kind of health economic access and affordability themes that we mentioned earlier in the discussion.
Well, and I haven't asked you both directly about the impact of COVID, but I think there's a pretty good pretty good point to finish on in terms of it there, because it seems to me from that discussion from both your perspectives that healthcare is, in terms of its importance and in terms of the investment, oops, my lights have gone out, it's going to be, it's only going one way, and that's it's going to increase in importance as an investment sector. So at that stage, with my lights having gone out, there they are. I'm now going to hand over to Isabella del Alcazar, Global Head of Sustainability at IE University. Isabella earned her PhD in molecular biology and has worked and invested in the biotech sector before joining IE. A quick thank you to our panelists, Georgina and Chris. And Isabella, over to you.
Thank you very much, Duncan, Georgina, and Christopher. It was a very interesting panel. I'm very honored to introduce to you our two extraordinary panelists today, Greg Simon and Jeff Goldsmith, with whom we will be talking about biotech and digital medicine in the post-pandemic world. So Greg Simon, well, here you are, welcome. Greg Simon served as president of the Beating Cancer Initiative, was the executive director of the White House Cancer Moonshot Task Force, and has held senior positions in both the chambers of Congress, I'm mixing up, and the White House. He is a knowledgeable analyst of emerging trends in healthcare, information technology, innovative drug research, and development and patient advocacy. And that's not all, but I had to show it all of the bios. And welcome, Greg. And Jeff Goldsmith is president of Health Futures, has provided strategy consultation to a wide variety of healthcare systems, health plans, supply and technology firms, and is one of the US foremost health industry analysts specializing in corporate strategy, trend analysis, health policy, and emerging technology. He has been a lecturer of the University of Chicago on health services, management and policy, is a member of the editorial board of Health Affairs, and defines himself as a passionate about science. I think we all share that. Welcome both. So I am taking advantage of the conversation we just had, closing with Christopher, that he was saying, do we have to rethink the way we do things? I would like to ask the first question. I don't know who wants to start. Any of you can, about what are the lessons of this 15 months we've been living. And I know it's a very broad question. Maybe we can focus on the major issues and opportunities, and how can we move forward? Yes, Jeff, you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah, good day, everyone. I think it would be fair to say that the last 16 months has not been civilization's finest hour, despite astonishing scientific and technical capability. Our health systems and our societies were not ready for COVID, despite ample warning 18 years ago from SARS, which had an almost 15% mortality rate. We were unable to stand up the robust testing and tracing capabilities that enable you to isolate the virus. And we had to maim our economies in order to get this disease under control. I think SARS-CoV also revealed a gap between societal needs and commercial incentives. Infectious disease is, to put it bluntly, sort of a stepchild in commercial drug development, cancer, and the chronic diseases that carry far more lucrative product opportunities are way more important than antivirals and antibacterial investments, where we've, frankly lagged. And you saw that lag here, even though we were extraordinarily rapid in standing up an innovative suite of vaccines for COVID. We still don't have the antiviral therapy for people that have the disease, nor do we have remedies for the long COVID, the chronic effects of the virus. So I think we've really got our homework to do here. We're going to have to industrialize our response to these disease threats, because this is almost certainly going to happen again, and we will have no excuse for not being ready the next time.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Hola, Isabella, and good morning, everybody, especially poor Chris McFadden on the West Coast. One of the problems that doctors have is that they're professionals giving all of us advice, and we are amateurs in carrying it out. The pandemic showed us a lot of things. Christopher McFadden mentioned companies with compliant cultures. Well, I don't think any of the Western countries have compliant cultures, if by that we mean people who are willing to follow public health guidance. We learned this the hard way during this pandemic. We also learned something very important. We can move much more quickly to develop vaccines and drugs than we think possible today. And in fact, from the investor standpoint, what COVID showed us is that we have already passed and are in the middle of a transformational moment in the way we develop new therapies, vaccines, and other medicines, but we have not yet distributed that technology and know-how across the United States and across the world. But several things are converging that make this such a special moment, and they converged in COVID, but there was too much chaos for people to focus on it. And those two things are Moore's law about the doubling of productivity of computing, and the Human Genome Project, which has given us insight into diseases and to health that we didn't have 20 years ago and certainly didn't have 50 years ago. So those two things enabled us to create a global vaccine for a new viral threat in record time. And then we were faced with the traditional challenge of how do you physically move a vaccine from a laboratory into people's arms. The first part of that equation, this transformation, is powered by the fact that the millennial generation is now coming into the age where people invest. And the millennials, as you can see from the stock market in the United States, tend to be very excited when they get a hold of a particular company or a sector. And the millennials are seeing their parents take care of their own health and their grandparents' health, and they realize how much of their budget has to be devoted to health. So we now have a whole new source of investing, just the way the boomers in the 1980s created the longest bull market in history in the United States. We're now entering the era where the potential for investing in breakthrough drugs and therapies is unparalleled. It is a golden age. We have assumed for way too long that it will always take 14 years and billions of dollars to develop a drug. And if that is true, we can never address the thousands of diseases, especially rare diseases, which affect millions of people, in an affordable and quick way. That's what's so exciting about artificial intelligence, machine learning, the genome, and all the different companies that are built around that, because we can now bring the cost and time of drug development down to a few years, not 14, and tens of millions, possibly hundreds and not billions, by using this combination of computing power and the genome. And that to me is a silver lining around the COVID pandemic.
Great reflections. So I'm going to jump 1 second to a poll question we have so that we get to know our audience a little bit more. And I'm keeping the transformational movement in my head because I want to continue. It's really interesting. So our poll question will be, beyond financial returns, what is the key determinant for investing in a healthcare company? So please tick any of these options so that we know better who's listening to us: disease focus, underlying technology, stage of development, or a broader social impact. I think I'm really looking forward to see the answers from the audience. This also helps us define the content that we're going to share with you. I was thinking, Greg just said that we're in the middle of this transformation, and we talk about the readiness and how we now have more tools to put the solutions and in front of the patients. But is there a barrier, the regulatory barrier that came up in the first poll? What do you think about that? Will it change somehow? Or what I mean to say is we need also the system to change. We cannot stay for 14 years waiting for a new drug. So I don't know if you have any
Jeff,
thoughts
you want
on
to go
that.
first? I'll let Jeff go
Well, I mean,
first on that because he's.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, you made the point about the rapidity with which we were able to stand up a vaccine and using a novel technology, a technology that had never been applied before to vaccine development. So I think the regulatory agencies stood aside somewhat, given the urgency of the task, but they're still not approved for use. They're provisional. So I think the regulatory system is still playing catch up here, and how you coordinate the regulatory regimes in the EU, the US, and other countries is still, I think, quite a conundrum. But you know a great deal more, Greg, about the regulatory environment than I do.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'll stipulate that we've both been immersed in it for a long time. I think one of the keys to the regulatory reform is the patient community. In the United States, I've started 3 different patient-focused nonprofits: Faster Cures with the Milken Institute, the Melanoma Research Alliance, also with the Milken Institute, and the Biden Cancer Initiative. And in each of those, starting back in 2003, the critical component of success is to activate the patient community, and for the patient community to represent their own interest in front of regulators, not just let the pharma companies regulate their interests, which can be divergent in some cases, especially when it comes to pricing. But this is more complicated in Europe because the patient foundation network in Europe is not as robust as the United States, because you have a single payer health system, and people receive more affordable and more available care in many cases, just as citizens, without the economic pressures that we have here in the United States, which are often the reasons that patients organize. But the other reason that patients organize is we have to constantly seek out the patient voice in the regulatory sphere. And when you look at the regulatory response to the COVID pandemic, one could say that it was rapid. At the same time, when these studies were published and presented to the FDA, they would take weeks to put together a review panel. And the question became exactly what in the data is going to change in the next 4 weeks. Why do you need 4 weeks to review something that you have now in the middle of a pandemic? Can't you do that within 1 week? That's certainly enough time for people to read it. And this is hidebound, old school thinking that has to change. The other thing is the FDA in particular is going to need to determine how to review drugs created by artificial intelligence, how to approve clinical trials that are based on predictive models from artificial intelligence, and how to deal with real world evidence, which is comprised not just of the patient's medical records, but the patient's personal views about their own health. And as somebody with leukemia, I'm under treatment for leukemia and doing fine. I can tell you that sometimes my view of what should happen is very different from my doctors or from the FDA's, for that matter. So the regulatory key is to bring new technologies to the agencies, which requires a government investment, and then to let the patient community and the innovators make their case that the world needs to change.
Thank you. We have the results from the poll. I think we will have them on screen. So disease focus, for the investment, disease focus, 24%. I mean, this is really balanced. Underlying technology, 29%, stage of development, 24%, and the broader social impact, 24%. So our investors here have, their decisions are very balanced on our 4 options. Many of the things we're saying, you talk, Greg, about artificial intelligence and how the new drugs will come. This will affect, obviously, investment opportunities. And both Susanna and Christopher brought up the trends on the investments in biotech, healthcare, life science. I mean, it's all the whole package. But there's a big challenge here. Of course, we need to trust in the digital, and because it brings us a lot of opportunity and it shortens the time. But what about cybersecurity? I know this is a big challenge we're facing, and should we be investing more in that? Jeff, I know we talked about this. I don't know if you want to give your opinion on this.
Yeah, I think this is something it's not going to sneak up on us. I mean, we've seen Ireland's health system basically locked down for 2 weeks by a ransomware attack, while our safety net health systems in the United States were struggling to deal with COVID. They were assaulted by ransomware attacks. Ransomware is blocking access to patient records is not the most significant risk. The rollout of 5G is going to connect the entire hospital and all of its systems that require electricity to the internet. So the ability to weaponize the hospital, to turn hospitals into ovens in a period of a few hours, to weaponize their imaging suites and infusion pumps. We're abjectly not ready to deal with this. And it isn't just a regulatory issue. It is the commercial enterprises that health systems will need to cope with these threats are by no means adequately developed. So I think this is one area where we really are going to need help from investors with long time horizons that understand and attempt to manage the social impact of these technologies.
Yes, of course.
Totally agree.
That's I didn't know if you want to continue. So I was also thinking from our audience, I think it was 24% talked about the broader impact. And I know we are becoming more sensitized to equality, inequality, access to healthcare as a whole. This is a topic I think we all care a lot about, and I'm sure every year more investments will be defined because of not only financial returns but other metrics, and this is very important. Having the opportunity, and this is something the wealth funds, the sovereign wealth funds have, of long-term visibility and a long-term investment can really help. But I am also thinking that many times we don't have the time, and we've seen this happening last year. How can we motivate, or what is it that we have to push? Is it the private, the public, the collaboration between public and private sectors to innovate and bring in solutions? Do you have, what do you think, Greg, here?
Yes, I've been thinking about this a lot because I get asked the question all the time. Now that Biden is president, what should he do with the new cancer moonshot, so to speak, that he did when he was vice president? Well, the first moonshot, we only had 9 months. And so we focused on collaborations with the private sector and academia and internationally. And we achieved a lot of things in only 9 months. And now with 4 years, it takes a different kind of thinking. And I am convinced that the critical missing link in the American health system is racial inequality. And that's why I view all the work I'm doing to bring new therapies to market through investments and advising that it's critical that we address the racial inequality issue in this country. A black man with prostate cancer is much more likely to die than a white man in America. A woman with breast cancer is much more likely to die of breast cancer, a black woman in America, than a white woman. This is unacceptable. It has always been a tenet of the Moonshot and other organizations I've led to address racial inequality. It is a tenet of many other organizations, but I realize now that we need to not make it one of the tenets. It needs to be the central organizing principle. And the reason is we can save more lives more quickly by distributing the medical progress we already have to all of our citizens equitably than by another breakthrough that is unaffordable for a large segment of society. So I am a fervent advocate for social impact in biotechnology, and that's huge impact. But I think it's now more important that we focus on making sure everybody has access to treatments that we already have, because losing someone to a cancer that is treatable is, to me, the ultimate tragedy.
You're right, and these months we've seen how it's not only important to take care of the people from those countries that can afford it, but having everyone from all of the different countries with the access to the vaccine will help control the disease. No, this is very important. Anyway, do you think there should be like operations from a policy making standpoint of view that would define how the funding should go into the corporate sector? And we don't have a lot of time left. Jeff, how can we be ready for the next big thing? Let's hope it's good or not as bad as this 15 months by fostering all the corporate, the small businesses or biotech sector in general to be more innovative?
Well, I think part of the challenge here, and I suspect it isn't just unique to the States, is that a lot of the digital tools that we've been talking about, the ones that enable us to interact real time with patients, those aren't equitably distributed either. In other words, we have big chunks of our country, despite trillions of dollars in investment, that don't have access to broadband. We have a lot of folks that don't have a cell phone. So, the ability to communicate with people real time and to help keep them safe really does require far-sighted public sector investment. But that public sector investment isn't going to be realized unless there are commercial partners that enable us to roll it out. So I think it is absolutely a collaboration, and it's one in which the commercial sector is going to need to play a role by creating modalities and tools that are affordable across the society and that bridge the racial gap that Greg talked about, and also the socioeconomic gaps that exist in every country.
Yeah. So,
and let me build
ahead
on that really very quickly. I think for your investors watching this today, the question is the same question it's always been: are you investing in yesterday or tomorrow? And I think it's becoming clear that the health sector, the biotechnology sector, is about to enter a golden age. Marty Peretz, the former CFO of Goldman Sachs and now the board chairman of an AI drug development company called Recursion, said on CNBC a few weeks ago that when he was in college, his professor told him that the future of healthcare was computational. And that is where we are today. We are about to enter an incredible phase of development. And as an investor, I think it is important to recognize that investments in biotech satisfy both the need to improve human health and to make money if you're an investor. The social impact is just undeniable, and we need to enlarge that. But investors who are paying attention will see that the pharmaceutical industry is ripe for disruption. It is one of the last iconic industries, like automobiles and airplanes, to be disrupted by new technologies. And that is what's going on right now. And that is a wake-up call for investors to look at whether they're investing in yesterday or tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's also good what you said, that it's important that those companies make money, because this will foster more investments. So thank you very much. Our time has gone really quickly. I would love to have this conversation going on for hours. Thanks for joining us. The closing event, I don't know if you want to say anything. Bye-bye. So Javier Capapé, who's director of the Sovereign Wealth Research at the Center for the Governance of Change and adjunct professor at the University, will close this session. He is a sovereign wealth fund geek, no? That's how you define yourself. Thank you, Javier. So.
Thank you, Isabella, and let me start just simply by giving thanks to all of our standing panelists and moderators, to Susana, the Dean of the IE Global and Public Affairs School here at IE University, and also Duncan from the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, and all the team, Victoria and Enrico, for your help in building up this event, in this webinar. So let me just give you like 3-4 minutes of conclusions of what we have heard and some of the research that we do here. So CureVac, Sputnik 5, BioNTech, Moderna are all names that we are also familiar with. Even more names less known as VIR, biotechnology, or EpicVac Corona, right, are backed by sovereign wealth funds from Qatar, from Abu Dhabi, from Singapore, Russia, or Alaska. I'm saying this because sovereign wealth funds have evolved in time, right? From very, very, let's say, prudent and old style, if you want, portfolio structures, they have evolved now into more direct, more complex, and more close to private deals than ever. They are equipped to do that, to assist national economies, as we have heard in the case of Georgina and the sovereign wealth fund in Ireland, to build recovery funds directly, to put resources to work to buy medical equipments, or as heard from Chris from KKR, identify alphas in the complex models to identify not only, let's say, traditional sub-industries within healthcare, but also new industries, including health services or even the fintech around health, that will help in the end to solve some of the problems that Jeff Goldsmith raised during his intervention around the social issues, the Greg element on racial, let's say, divergence in treatment access, and also these tremendous metrics that he provided around the racial distance and the problems that you may find in therapies and developing solutions dependent on social issues that we need to overcome, right? All this is framed in an era of telemedicine. We all know that cybersecurity is going to be a key central element to combat the future pandemic, the future, let's say, combat against diseases should require a tremendous effort on building secure and protected infrastructures that will prevent this information to be stolen, to be attacked, and not only the information, as Greg was pointing out, but also the facilities themselves, right? So sovereign wealth funds have quickly reacted to this crisis, not only the urgent needs, but if you think about what Susana was commenting before, we have seen sovereign wealth funds investing in biotech over the last 3-4 years, right? So this means that we have had sovereign wealth funds anticipating the need of this biotech revolution. This pandemic has, as Greg was pointing out just now, typically affect sectors in two ways. Either accelerates pre-existing trends or disrupts the whole pre-trends, right? So let me show you how this element has played a key role within sovereign wealth funds. Acceleration related to the amount of investments made in biotech solutions and startups participating in venture capital rounds in the period January to September 2020, right? So just capturing the whole outbreak of the pandemic. that's the first thing. These deals have accelerated, doubling the number of deals in biotech startups compared to the same average of the same period in the previous 3 years, right? So we observed that. But we also observed the disruption brought by the pandemic and the limitations of some sovereign wealth funds to access this type of deals. We have seen a drop of 60% in the number of sovereign wealth funds participating in biotech startups since 2018. That represented a peak of investments in the biotech industry. What does it mean? We have more investments from a fewer number of funds. That means concentration. So this brings this idea of the need to really build capabilities, as was pointed out by Georgina from the Island Sovereign Wealth Fund, to really have a long-term investment thesis, right? So we need this kind of building capabilities in order to ensure that we have that consistent and permanent, let's say, or stable investment approach. The last thing I want to mention here connects with precisely the core of the topic is the following. The ultimate goal of healthcare is to increase health span and not just to extend lifespan, right? So if we want to have that, we need to highlight the importance of bringing solutions to all of these diseases that are going to grow because of, let's say, new modern ways of living. And I'm referring here to the burden that societies are suffering, for example, from chronic diseases such as cancer or diabetes, right, in developed markets. So we will see solutions that require long-term approaches. And on that, sovereign wealth funds can play a central role. During the pandemic, it's of course reasonable to focus on the diseases that are infectious, that have kind of cope all of our attention. But we need to go more into what is going to happen in the next 20 years, preparing for the next pandemic, having the systems developed so that we have the solutions, the technology, the regulation to adapt to this next pandemic, but at the same time focusing on these chronic diseases that are going to be conquering, sadly, more geographies beyond developed markets and jumping into emerging markets, including Southeast Asia, South Asia, and in general, all the growing population economies. So we explored today the future of healthcare. We'll look more closely into the eyes of those that are going to be able to provide the solutions from the technical side, from the technology, and also the investors. And I hope you all learn at least something that you can apply in your countries. We have gathered around, let's say, 20 different countries represented in this today's session. So we want just to leave this webinar with this message of hoping for, let's say, having an impact within this webinar to your own very countries, and that you are able to apply some of the things that you have learned today for the future of your societies. So basically, thank you very much for listening and participating from the IE Center for the Governance of Change. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully see you soon in our next webinar. Stay well.